you can't think of this as something that's like a quick service restaurant. You come in and you just push a PR and then boom, boom, it's like suddenly accepted. They go on to describe their change. It explains the dependency that exists. They say they have not written any documentation, but they're asking if they should. They had also already created an issue, uh, and they've also written details about their tests. After his contribution is when we actually started speaking to him about joining us full time. Hi, I'm Abhishek, and this is Open Source Made Simple.
So to begin with, Abhishek, can you tell the audience about yourself, a short intro?
Sounds good. So I'm Abhishek. I'm one of the co-founders and I'm the CEO of AppSmith. AppSmith is an open source project that's used by developers to build all sorts of custom business applications. Uh, Before AppSmith, I've done a bunch of other startups before. AppSmith is like my third startup. Uh, but I've also spent a little bit of time at a VC firm, and I also spent some time at a payment startup called EasyTap, which had acquired my first startup as head of product there. So I've been in the startup space for over 10 years now, just over 10 years, and uh, been working on B2B products as well as I've worked on a gaming product before this, and just in love with the idea of making something with a team, shipping that to customers, and then running and turning that into a good business.
Awesome. So why you decided to build AppSmith in open source?
A couple of reasons. I think the first primary reason was we wanted to be focused on developers as a audience, and we know that uh, developers care a lot more about open source, primarily because when you're using an app builder or a new web framework to build something, you need to understand how it works internally. You need to understand where do its pitfalls lie, what are the areas where they could struggle if they don't take care of it. So that was the first reason. The second reason why we wanted to be open source was because we really wanted to build a community of contributors and community of people who improve AppSmith, but also people who are able to turn AppSmith into something that they like and they care about. So we have a lot of users who fork AppSmith and they modify it a bit, and they're able to turn it into something that's useful for them. So these are I would say, the two major use cases why we decided to be open source. Honestly, it was like the default choice for us. So I think in hindsight, now we are thinking about how does it help. But at that moment when we were thinking of launching, it was very clear that it has to be open source.
I saw that recently you hit 20,000 stars on GitHub. So how has that journey been like? Any learnings, any takeaways from that?
So yeah, I don't think we thought we would hit like 20,000 GitHub stars when we started out. It seems like a really really big number. So I think the main focus for us has always been to just build a very high quality product that's reliable, and all our growth has been through word of mouth. So our focus is completely on making something that's reliable. We don't really do promotions or ads or things like that yet, but our focus has primarily been on ensuring our developers are successful, which means high quality code, high quality support, high quality documentation, tutorials, and at every single touch point where you interact with AppSmith, we ensure the experience is good, and that's been our main focus.
But also there is a commercial side to open source, right? Commercial open source projects. So AppSmith being a business, how did you how was your experience building a business in open source?
Yeah. So one is most open source projects are actually free. So it's not a misconception. The core of AppSmith is free and it's available to anybody. But on top of the existing users of AppSmith, we are able to provide additional features as well as some additional services which are not available for free. And that's the way we monetize an open source project. The core of it, of course, is free, but on top of it we add some additional features. We also provide support SLAs, and these are the things that matter for a large company. They might not matter to a startup. They might forever use our open source free edition, which is completely fine. But beyond that, we'll actually try to support mid to large companies by providing additional features and services.
Are those features also open source?
No, they're not. Those features are not open source. Those features are available in a different license.
Okay, got it. So, do you think that moving forward, more of developers and more of products will be built in open source?
Uh, I think so. It's been a trend that's been continuing for the last 10-15 years. I think 10 years ago, it was hard to imagine that you could build a business off open source. Maybe there was only Red Hat, which had successfully done it, and to some extent MySQL. But outside of them, there weren't too many successes. Versus this decade, success of GitLab, of Confluent, and then Databricks, which is monetizing Apache Spark, as well as WordPress, they've proven that you can run a business on top of this, and that's really essential because otherwise, what ends up happening is open source projects can only be done by developers who are already doing well financially, and then they have free time because they don't need to monetize and make money. So that's why it didn't attract so many people. Versus today, when it's clear you can do things that are open source, but also have a regular source of income and a regular method of earning revenue from customers. More and more people can actually now do open source, which I think is just really good. So I feel, yeah, this is definitely a long term undeniable trend.
So, there should also be a way of helping businesses grow in open source, because at the end of the day, if a business wants to build in open source, then open source community also has to adapt to it and bring some sort of changes, modifications.
Yeah, I think so. I think number one is there are now legitimate reasons why companies should contribute to a project, to an open source project, and improve that project. Because if your business runs on it, you should try to influence its direction, or in the worst case, try to actually fix the bug that you're running into, instead of maybe like completely changing libraries because you ran into a bug and going through this entire process of, I don't know, like just migrating to a different thing. Instead, if you're able to modify an existing project, that's just like so much better. You don't have to deal with changes there. So that's something that I'm seeing happening. Companies are taking more control of it. It isn't happening as much as I would have liked, but it's definitely happening a lot more than it used to happen before. So that's one. The second thing is, today we have the right tools using which we can engage with people who want to contribute, people who have changes that they suggest. We have the right tools, and it's just so much easier to, for example, just like run a security scanner on somebody's PR, or check for test cases, do all that. So it's just a lot easier to contribute, to accept contributions, and have a conversation around it. So those tools have definitely made a big business. I mean, a big difference.
Just to reiterate, can you please tell the audience like what is a free open source project and a commercial open source project?
Sure. So a free open source project is something that, let's say it's hosted on GitHub or GitLab. You basically try to install it on your local machine, or you install it on your on your AWS or GCP instance, and you can start using it. When it comes to commercial open source, there are a couple of different things that happen. Number one, you might have the company provide you a hosted version of that open source project that you can pay for. That's something, for example, AppSmith doesn't do today, but will be doing in the future. The second thing that commercial open source projects do is they build a proprietary set of features which have the open source project at the core, but they have a wrapper of proprietary features around that open source project. And these are then delivered either through a cloud hosted method, or again through a self hosted method. A classic example of that is going to be like GitLab, Confluent, or HashiCorp, etc., or HashiCorp's products. where uh, they provide both cloud hosting, but they also provide like a self-hosted version which is proprietary. Now in case of GitLab, it's really interesting because their proprietary version is also source available, but it's not open source. You still have to, for you to
Okay.
use it, you have to adhere to the license and pay them for it. uh, so that's another way that's becoming common.
You mentioned that AppSmith is open source but also has some paid features. So the
Yeah.
developers behind that are they the same, or how does that look like?
So the it's the same company. It's the same company that contributes to the open source project as well as to the community. I mean the paid features. The difference is that about 85% of our team is focused on open source, and only about 15 to 20% of our team is focused on the paid features. Now, over time, there's going to be more and more separation between both. But as of today, it's a fairly small team, so there isn't that much of a separation. They do take their decisions around what features, how to do it, uh, while talking to the open source side of the team as well.
So now let's talk about contributing to AppSmith. Let's say I found a bug. What do I
Hmm.
do?
Cool. So the first thing that you should do is look if there is an issue that's been created about it already or not. If you do find an issue that's been created, now this takes a little bit of effort because you have to find the right keyword, and it might take you a couple of searches. But once you find it, the main thing that you should do is just leave a comment adding your experiences with it. Leaving the screenshots or sharing the snippet of code where you've noticed there's a bug, and actually like a request for, hey, is there a fix planned on the roadmap, or is this something I can contribute to? Let's say you don't find an issue at all. What you should do is create an issue, and again in that issue just request for one of the maintainers to come in and give them some guidance around how to fix that issue, or if they can even should attempt to fix that issue or not. In some cases it might be too complicated and you do need help from maintainers. In other cases the maintainers might just come in and tell you, oh, you know what, you should go do X in that Y area. The most important thing here is just the type of communication and the way you communicate. That really matters here. I've seen some people leave bugs which are not really well written. You leave them half baked and you don't put in all the effort to describe all the scenarios in which you ran into it, or why do you think this is important. Instead you just leave something like, hey, this is a bug. You don't give any information to maintainers to reproduce that bug. So giving that information matters a lot, and if you do provide that information, you'll generally see a maintainer come back very quickly. At least that's what happens with AppSmith. Wherever users post a bug that's that has good instructions and enough reproducibility, you're actually going to hear back from somebody within a day, and then they can advise you, should you go fix it, or is this on our roadmap that we'll fix it, whatever the case might be. But that communication matters a lot.
So if I'm working on a fix or working on an issue, so it's natural that I will have doubts about AppSmith, about some
Yeah.
features. So what's the best way to resolve those doubts?
So in case of AppSmith, we have a contributor channel on Discord. That's where we support people who want to contribute, as well as people who are in the process of contributing, helping them out. This is like, it's real time chat, so it's pretty quick. In other cases, you can, of course, start having a discussion around the solution in the GitHub issue itself. We've seen most people prefer to have the chat conversation in GitHub itself, because especially because most people are fixing small bugs. But we've seen people who are trying to contribute something major, they end up joining our Discord and sometimes getting on Zoom calls or Discord calls with our team members to ask for help. So really, depending on the size of the issue, it varies, and we are very happy to come in and provide support and pair program with you if the need be, whatever else you require to contribute.
That's nice. So let's say I want to contribute a feature to AppSmith. Can I do that?
Absolutely, yes. So there are, again here, you should either see if this feature has already been listed, or this feature has not been listed and you want to just contribute it. So similar to the issue, just talk about why it's important, your ideas for the issue, and just ask the maintainer if this is something that they think is worth contributing to. So with AppSmith, we have a lot of engineers who work with us today full time, but they actually started working with AppSmith as a contributor. So that's the way we met them. And in those cases, generally the interview process is a lot quicker because we've seen your work, we know how you communicate, and we know that you have a good idea for the product and you know how to improve it. So all of that makes it a lot easier. But again, with features, that's what we basically encourage. In case of some features, you might need some design help. So you might either want to use our existing Figma files and modify the design system, or and create UI on your own. Or in other cases, you might just have to request one of the maintainers to come in and help you there.
You mentioned something interesting here. So, what is the benefit of contributing to a particular open source project for a longer period of time?
So I think a couple of things. Number one is, let's say you're a student or you're working somewhere else. Now, contributing to open source projects is probably the fastest way for you to upskill, simply because you're going to be contributing to something that is being used in a real world scenario. So you're learning a lot from the users of that open source project. Uh, Instead of building side projects which might not ever see any users, I would recommend working on a project that's actually seeing some users and using that as a way to practice and understand what do good coding practices look like, how do I structure my code base, how do I think of the system design better. And in most cases, a lot of the maintainers of open source projects, they're really good programmers. So you're actually going to get really good feedback on your code review, and that helps you upskill. The benefit of continuously contributing to it is that over time you end up contributing a lot more, a lot faster, because you build that trust with the maintainers. So your PRs are just getting approved a lot quicker. You've sort of figured out what is the expectation from these maintainers of this project. Versus if you're jumping from project to project, you might not get to build that relationship. And the number of contributors who are very serious about open source are very, very few. That's the reality. In case of AppSmith, it might be a total of 100. So so with every single contributor who does something good, we actually have a good conversation where I'm sure the contributor learns something, and that I think is the biggest reason to contribute over a long period of time.
Let's say I want to be involved with the future of AppSmith, like the decision making and where the project is going. So, how can I do that?
So the best thing here is uh, writing really good feature documents, writing really good uh, arguments for why this feature should be approved. Because ultimately, in AppSmith, all the conversations are happening in public. Even our internal team, they're using GitHub issues to discuss things. So for us, the best way to influence AppSmith's roadmap is to is to be somebody who's actually communicating with great passion and commitment about why they care about this feature. And you're going to find us engaging with you just like we would engage with a internal product manager or an internal team member. It's basically the same. And in some cases, let's say if the feature is a lot more complicated, we might invite you for a discussion so that we could actually have a quick discussion on a video call and discuss the core factors. Or sometimes it might just turn into a longer document or a Miro board or something where you're listing down these points of view.
Is there also a differentiator between a good contribution and not a bad, but not so good contribution, which has scope for improvement?
Yeah, absolutely. There are major differences. The first difference again is something that I've said before is communication. If you've contributed a PR, describe exactly what it does. Don't just leave it to the maintainer to have to read through the code to understand what it does. That's one. Second is pay attention to any other comments that have been given on other PRs. In case of AppSmith, the commonest feedback to contributors is please write test cases. That's the commonest feedback. It doesn't take you too long. Just write test cases for what you've done. So just if you see in that particular repo, you other contributors have gotten feedback like that, just try to adhere to that feedback, or ask the maintainers, hey, this is what I've done, is there something that you expect me to do? Try to adhere to their code contribution guidelines as much as possible. And as soon as maintainers reply, try to get back to them quickly. In a lot of cases, we've seen PRs are like 95% there, but they never get checked in because the person who contributed it just disappeared and stopped replying. And that was a waste of time for everybody, uh, whoever contributed it as well as the maintainer who spent time on it. So I would say, like, if you are interested in contributing, uh, if you don't have too much time, start small, because bigger contributions will take more back and forth. You will get some code, some reviews, and you will have to act on it for it to get accepted. So you can't think of this as something that's like a quick service restaurant. You come in and you just push a PR, and then boom, boom, it's like suddenly accepted. We have seen people contribute really well whose PRs were accepted literally in like 30 minutes, but they adhere to these things. They explain uh, their contribution well. They write test cases, and they engage with the maintainer very fast. So, and their PRs get approved. Yeah. So that's the biggest difference, I would say. I think, in especially when it comes to student contributors, I've seen the communication to be quite lacking, and that's the main advice that I can give. Honestly, like any developer who's trying to contribute to open source, or even like work in a company, you have to become a proactive communicator, especially today when we are all working remotely. If you're just a silent communicator, or I mean, by silent communicator, I mean you just don't express yourself, I think you're not going to succeed that much. Okay, I think you should be able to see my screen here.
Yep. Yes.
Okay, great. So this was a contribution that was over a year ago, but it still stands out as one of the best. This one just adds a custom Fusion chart. Fusion chart is a library that we use. It adds an extension to it. Now here, uh, they go on to describe their change. It explains the dependency that exists, and also suggests maybe we could opt out leaving this dependency. Uh, they say they have not written any documentation, but they're asking if they should, and then they've described what's the problem here, that the whole chart will re-render when there are relatively not so great. But they've also explained why they've implemented it like this, and some suggestion for a future change. Uh, they had also already created an issue, uh, and so they had done this before, so they've written more details here, and they've also written details about their tests right here, and they've left a screenshot of what this looks like once this was implemented. So this was really good, and in this case, we ended up just engaging with this developer, and this developer also ended up, I believe, contributing one more thing later. But this is an example of a really good contribution, and we were able to merge this in very quickly. This is an internal engineer, but they've just described very quickly what they've done. Uh, they've written how they've tested it. They've used the checklist to figure out what is still left, and in every single update that they have, they just add some more details, and then the review process is quite quick here. So this is an example of just another good contribution. We had another contributor. So actually, let's find him, who had contributed to us before he joined us. After his contribution is when we actually started speaking to him about joining us full time. So I'm just going to find his contribution as well. Okay, this one. So the circular progress widget, this was contributed sometime this year, and just went on to first created an issue, uh, added some details of, like, this is a, as you can see, it's not too much description, but it's enough.
Right.
I've tested it like this, and I think the interesting thing here was uh, just how much he engaged with us. Like, once we had some issues around design, he actually ended up just sharing the functionality of it, showing that the design is there. Our designer came in and started looking at this and suggesting some changes. Then he actually continued engaging with this, and it's all happening fairly quickly. I think his first contribution was Jan 7th, and then by Jan 10th we have a good conversation going on, and then just engaging really quickly right here. And then the code review happened, and uh, then this was actually merged in. So it took like about 8-9 days for this to get merged here. So this is another example, and we were really impressed with this person's communication and his what's the word, like his persistence to do this. He's obviously a good engineer, so that was very clear, and so we ended up just talking to him and hiring him.
Yeah, so basically, what I learned is that code is obviously important, but how you communicate your code and how you take feedback, that is equally important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So building great software is, it starts with an individual, but ultimately it's always great to just take feedback from other people and turn it into a little bit of a collaboration. And that's where you'll actually, uh, so previously when I was mentioning, I see a bunch of people leave it at like 95%. That's so common that people just drop it at the 95%. You're literally at the goal post, but you refuse to kick the ball in. And that happens very, very frequently. And generally, people do that because I think they were expecting that, hey, if they've checked in some code, it's already great. Uh, they shouldn't get too much feedback. And if they get feedback, they stop responding about it. That unfortunately is not going to work really well in a company or in any other setting, because you have to collaborate with people.